Hi, everybody. Frank McNally here from Public Spend Forum. It's right after 2 o'clock. We're going to get started with our webinar, 7 Tips for Better Market Research. In just a second, I can still see some participants are filing into the room. So while everybody's getting situated, I want to give you a little heads up on the Zoom room today. We use Zoom web conferencing, which we really like, and it makes it easy for everyone to engage with us during the session. We do want to hear questions from you. There's a couple different ways that you can submit a question. You'll want to hover on the bottom of your sort of Zoom screen, and that'll bring up a toolbar. You'll see a box for Q&A, and that's our formal question and answer submission. So if you have a question today and you want to issue that to myself or to Raj, who's joining me, you can just put it in the question and answer. You can also chat us. Chat's available as well. So send us a chat. You can send it to all panelists. You can send it to everybody in the session today. And also, you'll want to keep an eye on that chat box because our colleague Yanisa Perez de Leon is going to be sharing some helpful links and resources throughout the webinar today, and you'll be able to access those there. So if Raj or I reference something, you'll see the link in that chat box. So it looks like it's about 1 after 2 o'clock Eastern time. So let's go ahead and get started. We are really glad to have you today for our webinar on 7 tips for better market research so that you can identify suppliers and contracts and deliver better procurement outcomes. So this is presented by Public Spend Forum and GovShop. Let's tell you a little bit about what we do at Public Spend Forum and GovShop. There we go. So Public Spend Forum is a market intelligence and procurement innovation platform and ecosystem. We serve public sector markets across the world. What we envision is open government markets for what amounts to about $10 trillion in global public spending. We know that government needs this support. We know that suppliers need access to the government, and that's really what we strive to do at Public Spend Forum is better connect buyers and suppliers so that this $10 trillion in government spending is spent more efficiently, more effectively, and allocated and distributed, in a healthy manner for all companies that have goods and services they can offer to the government. How are we creating open government markets? I'll let Raj say a few words here, but this is a slide showing all of our suite of tools and services, which have been expanding recently. We're really excited about that. You've probably heard about GovShop, our supplier intelligence and opportunity matching platform. You can think of that as sort of a Google and LinkedIn for government contracting. That's govshop.com. Definitely want to check that out. GovAirs is a market research and procurement innovation training and service arm that we have. And then GovLabs is a really neat thing that we're putting together here. Raj, you want to say anything else about this tool suite here?
Sure. Thank you, Frank. And thanks, everyone, for being here. I see we've got a lot of people from across the country here and even some across the pond. But yeah, no, thank you. I think you covered it, Frank. I think the goal here is everything is geared towards market research and procurement innovation. So we've had a lot of requests, the data we've been putting together for a while and providing it for free. But we had a lot of requests for, really training and services because people want to build their capabilities. So that's something we start building on. And labs is really kind of a continuation of the community we've been building for the past several years globally. So you'll be hearing more and more about that.
Excellent. Okay, so let's get into our objective and overviews for today's webinar. So this is sort of what you're going to learn and how you're going to learn it. I introduced myself briefly earlier. My name is Frank McNally. I'm our Director of Learning and Content Development here at Public Spend Forum. I have a background in federal contracting. I was a contracting officer with the Transportation Security Administration. So I've worked inside of government creating contracts, and I also worked as a management consultant on the other side, responding to government contracts and writing proposals. So I like to share my perspectives and happy to be with you today. Raj, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I don't want to take up much time.
Sure.
Again, thank you for being here. I'm the CEO, and I'm also, out there really trying to learn more about what needs are. So we're engaging people across all levels of government, federal, state, local, internationally as well. So I'm always excited to really learn about what's going on at different levels of government and what the needs are both on the government and supplier side. So excited to learn more here today as well.
Fantastic. So what we hope you come out of this today with is an appreciation for the value that market intelligence, market research provides for procurement outcomes. We'll discuss a couple principles that are critical to effective market intelligence, sort of charting the problem and some of the challenges that you face in the field doing market research. And then we'll go over some tips on how to utilize techniques like keywords, category codes, and available sources to conduct better market research and ultimately get top government contractors responding to your solicitation. So that's our agenda. Without further ado, I think we'd like to go ahead and try to make the case for better market research. And our key question, why is market research challenging in the federal government? Raj, you've described this problem for us before. Would you like to kind of lead here and get us into the program?
Yeah, and one thing there's a little typo there. I think what we talk about today is not just about the federal government. This is really about market research in general, just to be clear. So I know there's a number of state, local people on as well. So I think one of the things that Public Spend Forum's done over time, right, is we work with a lot of leaders across all levels of government, as I mentioned. So one of the surveys we had was around different skills in government, right, and where there's improvement needed. So there's this, what you see on this slide here is just a small segment of the skills that we ask questions about, and specifically related to market analysis and market expertise. And you can see here the survey respondents, who are mostly state, local, and federal chief procurement officers and leaders. The survey came back and said only a very small proportion, the dark green portion, are considered to be doing market analysis really well, and something that and have market expertise, deep market expertise. So that's something that came up. And then next slide, Frank. Another similar survey, we asked about different skill sets and processes in procurement, right? And what are really the most important practices? That's on the bottom across, like horizontal axes. And then where is most improvement required? That's the vertical axis. What we see within that top right quadrant there, right? And if you look at the top right, it says market analysis in there. So market analysis was one of the skills required or identified, again, by leaders as one of critical importance, but with the most improvement required. So the point of this is to say it's very critical to achieving good procurement outcomes, right? But it's lagging. Both of these slides really emphasize that point. So that's why we've taken this on as a really very important thing. And so if you go to the next slide, Frank, thank you. So then, why is market research so difficult? Honestly, we could spend all day talking about all the complexities of research, right? Research in general is difficult, but what we try to do is when we talk to people across the board, we boil this down to a simple couple of slides, this slide and the next slide. One is we know that data is everywhere, right? There's a lot of movement on providing open data. At the same time, anyone you talk to, you still have to piecemeal a lot of data together. So that's one thing we heard loud and clear. Second is the reality in today's world, markets are changing rapidly, right? And there's lots of new companies coming in and out, and it's just not humanly possible to keep up for anyone, right? Even if you were the most skilled market researcher, let's say, or research analyst out there, it's just not possible to keep up with everything that's going on for anyone. And third point, kind of, the reality is actually people don't have time, right? And there's a shortage of time because you have to do so many things in terms of getting all the other essential components of the process done. So if we go to the next slide also, Frank, and please, Frank, chime in anywhere. I don't know if I've missed anything thus far.
Sure.
But on this slide, the other thing just quickly to mention, and then we'll get into some of the key principles, is also when you're doing research, there's also an issue of a challenge of information bias and lack of objectivity. So really understanding when you're looking at different sources, right? Understanding who's providing it. So if you do an RFI, right? And all your information, let's say all your market research is based on our RFI, good luck is what I would tell you. First of all, I would probably give you a failing grade, just to be very candid. Because if you're just relying on your suppliers to get you all your market information, well, there's going to be a lot of bias. And, I wouldn't expect any supplier to answer it right objectively, which is kind of reality, right? And you can understand why. Market research often lacks critical insights, right? What that means is that, yes, you might read a Gartner report or something, that's great, but what does it mean from a procurement standpoint? What do you do with it? How does it apply to your procurement strategy, acquisition strategy? And then the last piece, I think we all seen this, right? It's always challenging, and there are some cultural hurdles, et cetera, about engaging with companies and industry during the process. And without doing that, it's honestly very difficult to do good market research. If you're not engaging your partners, engaging companies, again, and if this is just a kind of a hands-off process, that's also very difficult to do. And Frank, if I missed anything, you want to add anything to the challenges there?
No, I mean, I think these are spot on. They're that sort of information bias, the information asymmetry. It's tough. You have to do a lot of research and data collection if you want to know as much about a product or a service as the suppliers that you may be, ultimately negotiating with. And you may never know, everything that they know, but you can definitely bridge that gap with smart market research.
Yeah, great, great. Well, thank you, and thanks, Frank. And so if we go to the next slide, so what we're doing, and we'll talk about the key principles in a second, is we've taken this challenge on. I mean, that's our core focus, in creating open government markets. We truly believe market data and market information is one of the key ways to improve the quality of every transaction. And that's a really fundamental key economics principle, right? And so we've taken that on as our mission and our goal. And so what you see here, our product suite, GovShop is definitely something I would encourage you. We'll talk a bit about it as we go through, but where we're compiling lots of supplier data and other reports. So you can easily find that information that you need on suppliers, on markets, and not everybody has to go through and kind of repeat that process over and over and over again. There's 1.6 million companies on GovShop already. We're adding more and more contract vehicles, and now you can post your opportunities on GovShop. So again, we're not going to cover that today. We have separate webinars for that. But that's where, we're housing a lot of the supplier contract and opportunity data. And then on top of that, we already just mentioned, GovAirs and kind of this market research training, et cetera, that we're providing. So if we go to the next slide, Frank. So what are the key ways to do market research? So the next slide. So what you see here are 7 tips. I just want to kind of give you a hint here that, a lot of this information is coming from our market research course. And where you can imagine what we'll do in 45 minutes on this webinar is not doing justice to a very complex topic, right? So, so this is taken from our market intelligence training that we provide. But there are 7 tips we'll cover here. And the first 3, the way we've organized them, are really some more strategic questions. It's not always clear cut, whether they're all strategic or tactical. So it's not, you could argue many of these other questions down throughout are strategic as well, but we've kind of divided it up this way for argument's sake here. So you've got a set of strategic questions that are more of your kind of set up your research, let's say, and then tactical of going about and doing your research, right? So we'll run through each one of these over the next 30, 40 minutes. And please feel free to ask questions along the way here, because that's one of the things we really encourage everyone to do along the way. Before we jump in, Yunisa or Frank, are there any questions thus far that we should take?
We did have a question about GovShop. If we want to do that now, or we can take it at the end.
Why don't we just go ahead and answer? Because I think it's, so everyone knows, we answer questions throughout because we like to make it as interactive as possible during a webinar, right? So please feel free to ask and we'll monitor.
Sure.
as long
So
as it's not completely out of like the sequence of things.
right on. So so Kurt's question is, does GovShop interface or link to any of the federal agency websites like sam.gov or, you know, the now defunct fbo.gov?
Yes, the short answer again, I don't want to take away from this webinar topic here, but the answer is yes. It links to many sites. That's not just a federal site, right? It's federal, state, local data, etc. So it links to a lot of the federal sites as well as other sites. That's the short answer. If that, hopefully that kind of clarifies things.
Yep, perfect. And I see
Okay.
folks that are out there that you're raising your hand. If you do have a question, we can't open the audio room, but you can definitely submit it through the chat or Q&A. All right, Raj, let's get on to our first tip.
Yes.
Understand why and what you're buying.
Okay, so the very first question, right? Like I think if any of you, I'm sure many of you have been in, doing procurement, whether you were a program manager at some point, right, and maybe not doing like procurement or contracting, right, or now you're actually in the procurement profession. You've been involved in buying in some way, right? And so before you buy, one of the very first things to do, right, is hopefully before we get, a statement of work from somebody, there's some basic questions that we need to be able to ask, right? And I think that's where many people in these classes, when we've done them live, they've told us, you'll see a lot of nodding heads, right? You can do the best procurement in the world, but if you didn't ask some of these questions up front, you might be buying the wrong thing, right? So it's really important that you ask some of these questions of why you're buying and what you're buying, right? And the why is even more important than the what. So start with an understanding of what the need is, right? And what success looks like. So the way it's simply stated, right? You want to know, what problem are you trying to solve for? What's the critical need? And if the problem is solved, what does success look like, right? What will have changed? And that's really important. And what we find is a lot of people do not take time to really ask those questions, and they jump straight to the what, right? Hey, I want to buy, I'll give you a very simple example for a very complex procurement. So building a border wall, right? You could say, well, we know that Boeing has some great panels and things that they put together, and we want to build a wall. Okay, again, I am not trying to be political here, by the way. It's just an example just to stress a point. But let's just say if we ask fundamentally a different question, instead of saying, well, let's go out and buy, a wall, if we said our goal really, the problem we're trying to solve for is, having people that are not authorized to cross the border from crossing the border, right? And we're trying to protect our borders, right? So then the questions that you would, from a market research, that might lead you to say, what are different ways of protecting the border? Maybe, there are other deterrents. Maybe there are other radar and kind of other types of technology that's been built over time, right? Maybe there are drones. So the simple example, I'm oversimplifying it here, is just to emphasize that the question of what problem you're trying to solve is more important than, what you want to buy as you start out. And I think the other thing I would emphasize here is the second bullet point, develop a problem statement, right? To the extent possible, if you're early enough in the process, right, in the procurement process, if you can put out a problem statement that again says, what's the problem? What are you trying to achieve? What need do you have? And then ask for ideas from companies. That's the best way to start, especially in areas where you maybe, you haven't bought before, or, the market's changing a lot and the technology is changing or the capabilities are changing. And it's better to go out and ask those like very open-ended questions than presuppose a long set of requirements that you may be based on historical information and do not really reflect what's happening in the market right now. Frank, you want to add, and what am I missing here?
Yeah, I think you're right on the sort of understanding the need, right? So a lot of times customers will come to you with, a specific like item or something that they definitely want or they feel they need. The opportunity to kind of zoom out and look what other solutions might solve their problem can sometimes save time and money. So I think that's a really important sort of question to ask. What is success here? What is the definition of done? And are there alternative ways to source something that will achieve that?
Great. And please, if there are any other questions that come in along the way, let me know. I think I see a comment here, by the way. There says 7 steps focus on data collection and not much on data analysis. Any further thoughts? Welcome on analytical techniques, Porter's 5 forces, etc. Great question, great comment, and it's coming from Sean Scott. Thank you for that. Absolutely. We don't unfortunately have time here, but we absolutely cover that. I think a lot of things like Porter's 5 forces. We have a couple of things here, for instance, that talk about cost elements and cost drivers and techniques for that. But you're absolutely right. There's a lot of different types of analysis you can do. And we do discuss that, but we won't be getting to a lot of that today. We will be mentioning some of those as we go through. So then let me move to the second point here. So the second tip here is ask the right question. So, you know, we asked about, you know, why and what, and there's additional questions then. Once you understand that, then, you know, putting together, before you start doing market research, you want to think about, okay, any research, right? Forget about market research for procurement, any research, you have to come up with a set of questions from an analytical standpoint. You have to say, okay, you know what, to do this research, you know, before I start Googling everything, what are the set of things I need to know? It's very important to spend some time thinking through this, right? And before you jump out and start just kind of looking for reports and all that, right? And because that will really guide your research in a more constructive and productive manner. So here's some examples of questions that we put together that are segmented into 4 buckets, right? These are typical types of questions that we see from a procurement market research standpoint. So some of them are very broad and some are more specific. And I'll run through these really quick. So the first one is very broad, right? What's the overall makeup of the market segment, size, and growth? And why that's really important is, you know, like what are the various market segments? You might see, for instance, within cybersecurity, there's, you know, probably, we know for sure there's multiple subsegments, right? And depending on your needs, right, you may have to go out to, and in each subsegment for a second, might have different sets of companies within them, right? And typically you'll have some companies that serve multiple segments, right? Some may have just like very niche, let's say. And depending on your requirement, you might need to decide, okay, you know what, do I want to bundle these requirements together? If I see, or, you know, do I want to kind of bring these together or keep them separate, right? And understanding kind of what those like segments look like, what are the offerings, how do they overlap? That's what can guide you in as you think about, you know, how do you go out to market? Obviously, things like what are the key trends, et cetera, happening, right? That will also tell you, hey, is this market, you know, really tight right now? There's a lot of or there's a very short supply and, you know, the prices are going up, or we don't really have any leverage. Or, you know, do we have, I think things like Porter's 5 forces can help here, is assessing like what kind of position are you as a buyer in the market? And Frank, I'm gonna keep pausing in case you want to kind of chime in on anything.
Sure, no, definitely. Yeah, I think the market segments and related, you know, those aren't always so easy to find. So, you know,
Yep.
we should mention that GovShop, you know, does a really nice job with our own curated public spend forum markets for some of the more popular buying categories. So it just kind of accelerates your market research a little bit. We have Tasha has a question, you know, and she wants to know is there a difference in doing market research when you have like a time crunch?
Yeah.
And absolutely, you know, if it's a quick turn or if it's something that you buy pretty frequently, you know, and you know who the suppliers are, you know, in that market, you should always be looking for new entrants, right? Because new entrants create better competition, can drive prices down. But really, you know, it just depends on, like, if it's a new program, you're gonna have to do a lot of market research. If something that you buy regularly, your market research is really going to be about, okay, did anything change in the market? You know, should I expect to be paying less? Like, are there any economic forces that are changing, the price structure of what I'm buying. For instance, anything that's being sourced with raw materials from China right now, probably going to have either inventory issues or price issues. So it does depend. Your market research needs to be appropriate to the circumstances of your procurement. So I just want to make that point.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think I would just add to Tasha's question is, I think if you're in a time crunch, what I would do is really then look at, if some of the, let's just say, one or two companies in that space, what you might do is focus on and identify who their competitors are and who are similar, what are similar companies. That's, by the way, another thing we're building on GovShop is a similar suppliers you can find, right? But you could just focus more on what are companies out there, right? You won't have time to answer, say, a lot of bigger strategic questions. So you might want to just focus more on what are, I know a couple of suppliers, who are their competitors and are there other contract vehicles, et cetera, out there, right? So you might have to boil some of those questions down to like some very specific ones that you can answer quickly. On this, let me just kind of go to the second point here, the supplier base. Understanding then, once you know the broader market and segments, right? Who are the suppliers? Like I was saying just now, right? Who are the suppliers? Are there a lot of new entrants, right? A lot of startups and new capabilities coming into the market. So that's really, really important, right? Understanding that. From there, what are the capabilities? This is a really, really important part, right? Well, what I've seen a lot of research mistakes here is to be very candid, in government, a lot of times suppliers in a segment are treated all the same. You just like a lot of times we'll have contracting officers just say, oh, you know what, this company, let's just take a very simple services example. Well, they both provide management consulting. They must be the same. Not true. Right? It's really important to understand what the differences are. And we always emphasize, what are the differentiators, right? How are companies differentiating themselves? What are they saying about themselves, right? And how does it match up with what you need, right? And so that's really, really critical, right? So maybe you'll find two management consulting firms, but let's say you're doing something in human capital, and you find that one of these companies is really specialized in human capital, and they've got they've done so much work in that area. Whereas another company, yes, they might have the same labor categories, but they don't have experience in those human capital projects, right? So but that's, again, I'm kind of oversimplifying the examples here. But it's really important, this capabilities. I just don't see it done well a lot of times. And it's something that we need to pay much more attention to, because there are nuances between companies, and those nuances may be very, very important to the capability you need to drive success in your procurement.
It's worth noting that we spend a lot of time emphasizing to suppliers and to contractors that they need to be thinking about their differentiators as well. It sometimes can feel like it's way too hard to differentiate one supplier, one contractor from another. And so we really emphasize that in some of the training we do for the private sector. Find your product market fit. Why should I care about your company versus another company that might just feel the same?
Great. And then last one, we have another slide on this coming up on the next page, is the economics of cost and pricing. I think this is where, understanding, how pricing works in a market, what's the business models of companies, right? And what are the cost structures? In some ways, you need a little bit of understanding of finance and financial analysis as part of this. Again, this is, we know, a big frustration part for some companies too, right? A lot of times, this is also approached very generically, where, we'll send out a price template that doesn't match up in any way how the market may be pricing, right? And it leads to a lot of frustration, and a lot of companies, honestly, that might be qualified, that walk away, right? So it's really, really important to understand, what's the pricing models in the market? How do the companies make money? And if we don't understand that, and we just kind of throw together some pricing templates, I think we're likely to drive away. Yes, you'll get companies to respond, but did you just drive away the best companies, right? That's the question. So let's go to the next page. Just very quickly, and then we'll move over to kind of some more of the tactical. I think there's one more after this, and then Frank will take over. But cost elements and cost drivers are really, really important thing to understand. Again, we do a whole exercise on this and during our workshop. I love this exercise. But I'm not going to get into too much detail here, but just kind of get across the analytical method here is basically if you look at a makeup of the price of a product, right? You could break it down into, say, its component parts, right? So you could say, for instance, let's say in this case, right, there are, I'll take a labor example, maybe, there's a cost of labor. Maybe they pay some benefits on top of that. Maybe there's some training costs, right? The company incurs, so everyone can understand this simple example. So you've got labor, training, some benefits, right? Maybe there's some other expenses. Cost drivers are basically what drives those costs then, right? So if you said, okay, let's say labor cost, okay? If you said labor cost, and then you said, what drives that cost? I think we could probably all say, right, labor cost, it's probably level of skill or what we're asking for, right? That's going to drive the cost, right? Qualifications, like how many years of experience or degrees or something, right? Maybe it's certain specialized skills or expertise that you need. So understanding what are the drivers of cost is what you can really change, right? So you could say, you know what, I don't really need that skill level. It's too high for what we need done. So we can bring down the skill level, right? Let's say we don't need a PhD for this job. We need only a master's degree, or we don't need a master's degree. We only need a college degree, let's just say, right? So understanding what those drivers are and then questioning what you can change is how you can change the picture, right? So that's where I would emphasize the difference between cost elements. Cost elements are just telling you what the buckets are. Cost drivers tell you what can you change and what can you impact, right? And by changing your requirements. So that's the way you want to think about this. So that's another important aspect of understanding, your cost and economics of suppliers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the pleasure of teaching as part of the digital IT acquisition professional program. And we're going to be talking a little bit about cost drivers tomorrow when we talk about evaluation criteria. But on the market research side, if you're not doing this, if you're not understanding the cost drivers, you could have your customer in position to potentially, end up paying for things that they don't need. The classic example is sort of uptime and reliability in web services.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of people think they need, the proverbial 5 nines of uptime, 99.9999% reliability. Well, in reality, very few, entities or businesses need that degree of reliability. You can get it, but you're going to pay for it. And so that's important to understand these cost drivers so that you can kind of help your customers level set on really between what they want and what they need.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. So let me just keep moving. Again, we do some cool exercises with that. So that's always fun. And I think what's fun about that exercise is I've shown people that you can actually, in a couple of hours or in an hour, be able to figure out a cost structure and be able to come up with some actionable strategies to improve your requirements just by thinking about this for an hour. So then, okay, now you have your questions, right? And what kind of things you need to find out. Then, okay, where do you go to do your research? So that's tip number 3. Use a mix of research resources, right? So like I said up front, if you're relying on one thing like an RFI and hope that answers all your prayers and questions, good luck. It's really good research always requires on a mix, right? And some level of objectivity. So here we have some secondary and primary research ideas, right? Internet research, everybody does on secondary. There are lots of research providers like us out there, but Gartner's and AMR and others, right? Industry publications are always great, right? Every industry has a publication and an association, right? So I would encourage you to go out and call those associations up. They always are willing to talk. And then you have like Wall Street analyst reports, for instance, right? Or SEC filings like 10K reports. So all are rich of information, and you can look at those. Primary is, talking directly to people, right? So suppliers, of course, you've got to talk to suppliers, right? If you have the time. You can also, like I said, interview experts, interview, companies, surveys. A lot of times RFI, you could say, is kind of a survey, right? But can do other types of survey. We can keep adding to this list here, but the key points here on the right side are, use multiple sources, and triangulate. And what that just means is, if you find a number that says, this market is, $5 billion in size, will you just take that and run with it? Or are you going to check that against another source, right? What if another source then said 10 billion, right? You got to look further, because one is saying 10 billion, one is saying 5 billion. Which one is it? I don't know, right? And then be objective, right? Like you might have your biases. We all do. I do. I know that. But at the end of the day, good research is about being objective. Put your biases aside, rely on facts, rely on expertise, right? And put your biases aside and be objective. So with that, I'm going to pass it to, and I'll chime in along the way here. But Frank, why don't you take us through 4 through 7 then?
Yeah, and absolutely. One point I'd make here on the mix of resources is I always like to do the secondary research first before I went out and did the primary research, because if there's information I can access on my own, that just informs what I do in the RFI. It informs what I do with the suppliers. I think there's a duty that the contracting professional has to learn what they can learn on their own, and not just leave it to the contractors responding to the RFI to fill in the blanks. One of the features you'll see in GovShop, and this, Tasha, to your point, if you're doing quick market research and you just need to know, what's the socioeconomic composition of a particular category or industry, no longer do you have to search multiple databases for that, or do that big RFI and have vendors tell you. The GovShop filters that we use on that platform can answer that for you in like 3 clicks. And so we're going to show you that here coming up. But continuing with our tips for market research, the 4th tip is really about identifying the right keywords and codes. So as Raj mentioned earlier, we're moving now into some of the more tactical procedures for conducting market research. If you've ever done internet research, it's a bit of a trial and error. You kind of start with a general query, and I use Google for my primary search needs. But start with a general query, and then I can use that to help me hone down to more specific terms. And really what I'm looking for, not necessarily are more specific terms, but terms that industry uses to describe their wares. So as an example, let's say that we were going to buy surveillance cameras for a customer. What does industry, and particularly the industry that sells to government, what does that industry call surveillance cameras? Because it might not be surveillance cameras. So I can start with that general query and look at the results in Google. And this is another reason why we decided to create GovShop, because Google's got a lot of noisy results here, right? There's civil liberties articles, there's news articles here. It's not really the government market research that I need to be doing, but there is a link 3 down from the top there that's got what looks like a warehouse for security cameras. And that's nice because it tells me a few other search terms that I might want to use, like more specifically CCTV systems. So I might not have known to associate CCTV systems with my market research query for surveillance cameras, but now I've got an industry term, and I can use that industry term in GovShop to start searching more specifically for the items that I'm trying to buy using industry terms. Here's a little tip. If you ever search for anything on Google, whether it's for something in your personal life or for the government, searches related to. And this is really crowdsourcing effectively. There's billions of searches conducted on Google every day, and Google provides that information back to us, the searcher, in the form of searches related to. So here's an opportunity for us to see, other things that are other terms that are used when doing this type of market research. And this is just, again, how you can continue to hone down. We have a great tool on GovShop that you can find, and we'll link directly to it in our post-course email, but it's called the GovShop Search Assistance Template. And what it is it just kind of walks you through the process of starting from that general query and drilling down to the tactical, exactly what you're trying to buy. And Raj, I don't know if you have any tips here. It's not an easy process, right? There's not like a recipe. You just kind of have to start poking around until you find something that works and hit on a query that works.
Yeah, no, I think keywords, the key thing I think we tried to capture in that template that we'll post here, is it's not an easy, just using one or two keywords, right? We already all know, right? If you did a Google search right now on something, very likely that you'll have to do it again, right? And so I think it's making a list, especially when you're doing something complex like market research for a complex buy, right? You have to think about lots of different words, right? So, I mean, typically I would go through, and that's what this template tells you, go through your statement of work or like whatever answers somebody gave you, right? And put together a number of keywords and things. So you'll get some good results from one, and then maybe good results from another, and not so good results from another. So it's a lot of trial and error. And I think people that are really good at doing research, right, they know that and they've done it. And so that's all I'd encourage. Say, be persistent in the process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep. So, and just in this example, we've gone from a general query of surveillance cameras, and we've harvested CCTV systems, and now maybe we add government video surveillance and surveillance technology to our query. And we just keep getting better. We have a question here from Brandon. He's a contractor, and he's often heard of the importance of past performance documentation. It's not actually technically not always a go no go past performance, but it will be used in preliminary market research. A lot of times contract professionals are interested in finding out companies that offer something and have done business with the government before, because you have to be registered in sam.gov to do business. If you're buying something complex, if you're buying something that requires a real knowledge of how government operations work, yeah, you might want to know. Has this entity done business with the government? So contracting professionals have access to the system called CPARs and PEEPers. It's a crazy acronym, but it's the past performance, information database. And so they will go in and they'll look sometimes at past performance, but that's more typically when they're, getting on to award decisions, and the like. So hopefully, Brandon, I've answered your question there. Once you do have a good search term, and I keep mentioning GovShop because it is the tool for market research, you can enter that into the GovShop search query, and you can see, just how we deliver results. So you can search by suppliers, right? There are suppliers with CCTV systems in their names. Commodity codes. This is everything from the product service codes to the NAICS codes to NIGP codes. Great source for market research. There's contract vehicles where you can buy CCTV systems. That's GSA schedules, GWACs, co-ops, cooperative purchasing agreements. So GovShop, again, it's designed for government market research, and you can see why here, because the results we're returning don't include articles about surveillance. They include what you need to know. Our fifth tip is about identifying the potential supply base. Who are the contractors out there that do this work? How many of them are there? Are there incumbents? Tasha, if you're working on a recompete, or anybody working on a recompete, you know who your incumbent is. Is it time to find the new supplier? Are they is the incumbent participating in the recompetition? What companies are like those incumbents? That's a great place to start, just looking at the competitors of your current contractor. And what are you trying to do really with that too? Let's just talk about that for a second. You're not making an award in market research. No, what you're trying to do is write a solicitation or a requirements document that's broad, but also detailed enough to get what you need, but doesn't have anything that's overly restrictive that might restrict your competition. Ideally, of course, you want a healthy amount of competition for your ultimate solicitation so you can get that best value product or service. Who are your peer organizations using? This is a great opportunity to get up and meet your fellow 1102s or acquisition professionals. Who do they buy their technology from? Who are their service providers? What companies exist on contracts? If you're buying technology, GSA's IT 70 schedule is a great place to start because you're going to find a lot of companies that deal in and deliver IT and IT services, and finding out what their capabilities are, reading their capability statements, adding them to your call list and pre-solicitation communications are all really important things to do as you start to home in on exactly what you're buying and how you're going to buy it. But don't just focus on the traditional heritage government contractors. You got to be thinking about new and emerging companies. Government, we want to buy the best that we can buy. We want to buy new technology. We want to buy innovative solutions. Not always easy to find those companies because they don't maybe not know that they have something that's useful for government. So emerging contractors, emerging companies, definitely don't forget them. We have a filter for those on GovShop. Definitely check that out. Also, industry lists. You can go to your local PTAC center, procurement technology assistance centers. Ask them, hey, what contractors are in my area that do the product or service you're buying, and you can get lists that way. So these are all great ways to understand the field of competition, the contractor base of relevant companies that can ultimately service your requirement. Once you kind of have an idea of what you're looking for, and this is just a screenshot of a general search for emerging technology companies, you can start to filter down. So you'll see on the left there, we've got all of our filters, and these are specifically created for government contracting. So, you can filter by contract vehicles, commodity codes, whether firms have been registered with the government, or maybe you want to see only firms that haven't been registered with government because you've had a hard time, opening competition in past procurements. And this time you want to find companies that want to come in and compete. Innovation's really hot right now. So maybe if you're buying services or digital services or something that's really next level, you want to know, hey, has this agency had any innovation research or innovation funds awarded to them? So we have a filter for cyber data. Product and service type, I just used this earlier today when I was looking for, only wanted to see product type companies, products and hardware, as opposed to sort of big integrated solutions. So that's a useful tool. Don't forget also there at the bottom, government set-aside programs. This is a really common market research need. How many, especially if you're in the Veterans Affairs, for example, if you're in an agency that wants to hit its small business goals, you want to know how many socioeconomic concerns comprise a particular product service code or map to a keyword. GovShop's going to help you get there really quick. So we're big fans of that filter. Can save, too, a lot of time on the RFI process. You really don't need to ask that socioeconomic question anymore. Once you find good companies that are matching your criteria, you can save them to a list. You have to create a free account so we can remember you. But saving those lists allows you to conduct multiple different market research initiatives, in the same setting, and also share and export those lists. So at the end, I'm going to tease an upcoming webinar we've got on how you can use GovShop and some other principles to accelerate your market research report. So this is going to be really good. And I want to get to that too. But Raj, am I missing anything on the supplier lists and sort of the supply base? I know that's an important topic.
No, I think we're good. I'm just watching time here a little
Yeah.
bit. So I think we're at 2:48. I think on the next slide, I think you have contracts, right? Again, I would just emphasize, like, this is not, I think there's all types of, there's federal supply schedules, but there are cooperative contracts for state, local, and we're adding things like new kinds of vehicles on there as well. So if you go to the contract vehicles, so I think we always encourage looking at, existing contracts, right? Because you don't want to reinvent the wheel per se if there's existing contracts out there.
Precisely. And contract vehicles are an amazing source. If you don't have any idea about a particular product or service, just start by reading some of the GSA schedule contracts out there, even the descriptions that are in there. You can get right to the GSA schedules from our contracts vehicles page on GovShop. Same with NIGPs. Well, I think it's NIGPs. The cooperative purchase agreements if you're state and local. So definitely a very good resource, the GSA schedules in these interagency acquisition vehicles. And you should also, by the way, when you're doing market research, it's not just about finding the exact products or service, it's where you're going to buy it. Your acquisition strategy needs to be informed by your market research. If you're buying a commodity and you want to save time, money, and effort, GSA schedules likely going to have that commodity, and it's not just simple commodities. GSA schedules have something for everything, and it's a really good resource. You should definitely check out GSA schedules, especially if you're short on time. Our final tip is engaging.
Again,
Yeah,
I just want to emphasize, Frank, on the previous slide, yeah, that, again, we've captured a lot of the national cooperative contracts, so you can research those as well on there. So where it says cooperative contracts, because again, I know some of the GSA contracts may not be relevant to a lot of state, local people that are on here. So I think there's obviously in every market, there are different types of contract vehicles. So we're trying to capture all of them here. But point being, whether you're using this GovShop or something else, you want to be able to look at what are existing contract vehicles out there. So
absolutely. All right, our seventh tip, engaging suppliers throughout the process. We are big proponents, and I've not just since I've been on the private side, but when I was in government contracting as well, talking with industry. Ultimately, you need to be speaking with your industry partners. You can have communications with contractors all the way up to the point where you issue that solicitation. And so if you have questions or you want to learn more about particular discerning factors or differentiators of an industry, talk to contractors, talk to people that are trying to talk to you, and ask them, what do I need to look out for in this market? You want to be a little careful. You don't want to get into anything like too proprietary. You don't want to divulge something about your requirement that might give it a competitive advantage. If you do, you just need to write that into your solicitation. That's certainly not a not something that's going to harm you if you divulge it to everybody. But typically we see industry engagement that's one-sided. Government sort of stands up or writes something about their requirement, blasts it out to industry, limited dialogue during the requirements development process, like not getting good feedback, and then waiting too long. Honestly, if you wait till a few months before you need to have the award made to put out your draft statement of work, well, how much time are you really going to have to make changes, and how much time did you waste potentially on writing some requirements that didn't even need to be there? So we want you to be doing more strategic market engagement. Be smart, do your homework, engage suppliers, and do it early. Every single GovShop supplier profile has contact information for those companies. Send them an email, give them a call. This is the best way to incorporate innovative ideas and processes and the important differentiators into your requirement. By the way, that's going to save you time and evaluation. The better your requirement, the more informed your requirement is. You'll have less questions from vendors. You'll have less mods. It's going to make you have just a better experience altogether, save you time and effort. Just be collaborative, right? That's what we want to say. Raj, this is an important topic for you. What did I miss? What do you want to add here?
no, I think you've got it. Yeah, I mean, I think the key point is a cultural one, right? It's like from a cultural standpoint, I think we've heard a lot of reasons why not to engage with companies. I would say there's nothing that prevents you from engaging. There's no rule that says that in state, local, federal, anywhere we see. So there's a lot of assumptions around that. So I think as long as you keep it open to everybody, right, and whoever wants to talk. So
That's right. Absolutely. All right. So I said I was going to end this with a little mini case study.
just encourage that overall. Yeah.
Pardon, Raj. I think I spoke over you. I beg your pardon there. But yeah, so no, but that strategic collaborative market research communication, really big proponents of that. And I think if you talk to anybody that's been in government contracting for long enough, they'll tell you it's an important thing to be doing. All right, let's land this plane, and then definitely want to open the floor for questions. By the way, we've had some questions get submitted. I appreciate it. I had one question come in actually before this webinar even started from somebody who say, hey, do you plan to tackle the question of what constitutes enough market research? Because I think he was alluding to the fact that if you're inside government and you're doing market research and you bring your package to your boss or to the clearance committee and they say, well, this isn't enough market research. You haven't done enough market research. Well, how do you know what enough market research is? One way is to write a pretty good and comprehensive market research report. Anybody who's ever procured anything of significance in government is likely to have written a market research report. Agencies have different templates for these, as I'm sure state and local offices do as well. But typically in a market research report, you're going to have the same types of elements. We will have a webinar scheduled to go through this because we believe that writing market research reports, and good ones, are the way that we can kind of operationalize the tips that we've shared today. So in this blog, a lot of this is discussed in a blog that we published about 2 weeks ago. And Yanisa, if we can get that into the chat and also into the post webinar email, that'd be great. But what's the quick way to get that acquisition history? Because a lot of times, the market research report needs to address how has this been purchased before, what has been done on prior contracts, what potential sources of supply exist for this particular market category. Market analysis is something that you'll want to conduct, and a market analysis typically will involve some sort of idea of what companies exist in the particular segment, what's their socioeconomic makeup, where are they geographically, what are the things that you need to know about the vendors. Typically, you'll have to decide whether or not it's a commercial item. And if you don't know that what you're buying is a commercial item or service already, and I should rephrase, if you don't already know that you're probably not buying a commercial item, then the likelihood is that you are buying a commercial item. But we talk a little bit about that. Determining whether set-asides are appropriate. Very big topic if you're in the Department of Veterans Affairs or in any agency that's really keen on meeting their small business goals. Somebody was asking earlier about analytical tools. How do I find the types of data analysis on pricing to support something like an independent government cost estimate? Well, there's some free tools out there that you might want to know about.
Sorry to interrupt. I think we're just running up against time. I just wanted to give you a time check there.
Sure thing. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, we got about 3-4 minutes here. So these free tools to support your independent government cost estimate do exist. We definitely recommend taking advantage of those types of things. The contract awarded labor category tool, for example, is one, but the blog speaks about a few others. Then there's recommending your acquisition strategy. You're going to have to make a determination. You, the contracting professional, are going to have to say, look, based on my research, this is what I'm going to do. And if it's not well documented, then you might get some questions. Finally, supporting documentation. I spoke earlier about some of the tools and exports that GovShop can create. The market summary report is a really important one of those, where you can literally put in an industry code and spit out a comprehensive report about how many socioeconomic entities are in that versus non-small businesses versus small businesses. So definitely check out that blog. And Yanisa, when we put out this post-event post-event email, we'll have a link to register for that. I think it's going to be sometime in April. All right, well, let's do this again. This has been fun. We have a lot of great training and workshops for government professionals and suppliers. So these are just some of the upcoming workshops that we have coming out. We will make sure that these links and this particular information is in our post-event email as well. Raj, do you want to speak on any of these particular workshops?
Yeah, no, well, thank you, first of all, to everyone for taking the time. We saw we had a lot of people here, close to 100 people joined today. And the market intelligence, if you want to get in more depth, just contact us and we can see if we can schedule a training. But there are other areas as well, acquisition, innovation. That's a big one, by the way. Like, a lot of people are asking about what are all the new methods out there? How do you go out and buy? So this is, Ben McMartin, who's kind of a guru on this on our team, is kind of teaching that along with others, but deep dives into other transaction authority as well as, and then for suppliers, how to work with government. So just let us know how we can be helpful, whether it's these or if you just have a question in general, we're happy to help. And we'd appreciate if you could just spread the word about GovShop, and it's a free tool, right? And no charge. So let others know. We're seeing a lot more people come and use it for market research. So
Absolutely. And then if you are in the DC area, because I did see we had a question from a contractor and you want to understand better public procurement and position your company a little bit better to sell to government, I'm hosting a workshop on March 17th. That is St. Patrick's Day, so I'll be wearing all green. But if you're interested in the area, you want to come by for that, send me an email or use a registration link that's going to be in the post-event recap there. We're going to have a great day learning about government contracts and how to increase your chances on winning. That's all for us today. We finished with about 45 seconds left. I don't see any more questions. I think we've answered most of them. But like Raj said, we're always here, and you can reach us at Public Spend Forum anytime you've got questions. We are a resource for you. Thank you for your time today, and hope it's been well spent. And we will look forward to seeing you on our next webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.